Morning, everyone.
Good morning, Rabbi.
Good morning.
We are learning Mishnah Shabbos, Perek Zayin, Chapter 7, Mishnah Beis, Mishnah 2. I'd like to dedicate this morning's learning in memory of my mother, Mrs. Shalamas Rabinowitz, Shalamas Bas Reb Yaakov Eliezer. Learning should be a schus for her neshama. Okay. Avais, Malachais, Aboyim, Chasar Achas. When it comes to the primary forms of activities that are forbidden on Shabbos, there are 40 minus 1. How much is that? 39. Very good. Okay. So the point of the Mishnah right now is the point of this Mishnah is it's going to list all the 39 Avos Malachas. And it's important to remember that when we talk about Avos Malachas, father activities, father forms of work, then fathers implies that there are children or secondary. So you've got your primary activities, and those are called the Avos, the fathers, and then you've got your derivative laws, those kind of laws that are derived from the primary activities called toldos, the secondary ones, the children, so to speak. And both of them are forbidden minat Torah. Both of them carry a Torah prohibition, and all the ramifications of being a Torah prohibition. And the Mishnah, I'm about to say, is right now going to go through the 39 Avos Malachas. The art scroll here in the notes goes through them very nicely, together with mentioning what the Avos are, examples of the Avos and examples of the toldos, examples of the primary and the secondary. And we're not going to do the whole Mishnah today, but the Mishnah lists through all 39 of them. The Mishnah begins, it's Avos Malachas 40 minus 1. That is a common, there's another place in the Mishnah, in Makkas, where the Mishnah does the same thing. Instead of saying 39, it says 40 minus 1, which is actually because the Torah says the word 40. When it talks about lashes, we know that it means,
up to 40, right?
Right, the most 40. But it's really, essentially it's 40, and if you can't handle a 40, it goes down. But we know that it's not 40, it's 39. So the Mishnah there said, Aboyim Chasar Achas 40 minus 1, and here the Mishnah says the same thing. Okay. Hazareya, the first example. Now, another thing important to know is the Gemara points out that, what makes these the primary forms of activity that are prohibited are because these were the activities involved in the construction of the Mishkan. The Torah talks about keeping Shabbos and then the construction of the Mishkan, and the Gemara learns from there that they go together. If you want to know what are the primary forms of activities forbidden on Shabbos, you look at the construction of the Mishkan. They were there in the construction of the Mishkan. Everything else is derived from there. So although all these things were found in the construction of the Mishkan, the first 11 malachas listed are actually, they call it Sidur de Pas, call it the order of making bread. Now, there was bread in the Mishkan too, called the Lechem Apanim, but that's not the construction of the Mishkan itself. The construction of the Mishkan, when you talk about, let's say, as we're about to, planting and harvesting and all that kind of stuff, that really applied to the plants used for dyes, which they dyed, for different colors to dye different things in the Mishkan. Whether the Mishkan, the Big Day Kahuna, the priestly garments. So really, all the things here that we talk about in processing really have to do with the plants used for the dyes. However, as we will see, the first 11 malachas listed are called Sidur de Pas. They're actually the order that's involved in making bread, because of the fact that is the more common way of doing things for people. That's why the Mishnah listed it that way. Okay, so here we go. Hazareya, planting. Now, although I'm going to read to you here from the notes because they lay it out very nicely. Although the Av Malach is called Zareya, which refers to sowing seeds in the ground, right? That's what Zareya means. I use the word planting, but really it's sowing. It includes planting saplings as well, which is planting.
That would be a tolda?
No. Since there is no real difference between sowing and planting, the concept of this malach is any activity that causes vegetation to sprout or grow. Thus, its toilades include watering plants and trees. Okay, so Zareya is where you're actually doing something in the ground, right? The toilades are anything that promotes growth. And that would be, for instance, like watering. Okay, next. Havachayresh, plowing. The Av Malacha includes making a furrow in the ground and digging a hole in which to sow or plant. In general, the Malacha comprises any act of improving the ground to make it more suitable for planting. Amongst its toilados are smoothing bumps in the ground, filling holes, and plucking weeds. Okay, so charish is where you're digging in the ground, and being that the point of digging is to make the ground softer or more workable for planting, therefore anything like that falls under planting. Okay, now, since plowing measures the ground, plowing prepares the ground for planting, it should be mentioned first. You had a kasha? You had a question?
Yeah, of course.
The Mishna is mentioning planting or sowing before plowing. You plow before you sow, right?
No.
However, the Mishnah lists it after planting to teach that where the earth is hard and must plow it a second time to cover the seeds that were sown, one is liable for the second plowing as well. So there's a plowing that you do after sowing also, and that also would make you, that's also considered a malacha to be liable on Shabbos. Next, v'ha'koitzer, reaping, detaching any growing plant from its source, such as reaping stalks of wheat or plucking fruit from a tree, falls into the category of reaping. They don't list any taladas here. Okay, v'ha'ma'amer, gathering. The harvested crop is gathered into small bundles in the field, right? You cut it down, and you make it into small bundles in the field, which are later gathered into one large bundle. That's how they did it. Eat both acts are avos of this malacha. Whether it's the small bundles, the big bundle, those are both the avos, the primary form of malacha. Sticking dates together to make a cake of dates and threading figs together on a string. Did you know that figs were strung? Okay, now you do. And threading figs together on a string are toladas of this malacha. Yeah, that's how you gather them together after being harvested.
Whether it's done in the field or not, anyway, where you do it.
I don't know about that, but these I think were all done. Well, sticking the dates together. I don't know where they were done exactly. I don't think they were done at home. I think they were done at some point in the processing, in the early processing. Okay, next, hadash, threshing. This is detaching the kernels of grain from their husks. How'd they do that? What they use? So I always remember in learning history, they use like these hockey sticks kind of things. But the way but it seems that in the times of the Mishnah, they used animals. For an animal to step on it, the animals would step all over it, and that would separate it. Okay. It's toiladas. What are toiladas of threshing?
Doesn't dash literally mean to crush?
It means to thresh.
Well, it means to thresh doesn't mean to crush with the foot.
When you crush it, when you thresh it, you're typically crushing it like that. Its toiladas include milking animals and squeezing the liquid from grapes and olives, schita. Okay, where basically you're extracting something from what it's held in. Okay, next, v'hazora, winnowing. After the kernels are detached from their husks, the mixture is tossed into the air with a pitchfork. The wind blows away the chaff, the husks, stems, and leaves, leaving the heavier kernels. This malach is the first of three in which one removes unwanted items that are mixed together with wanted items. Because as we will see next, habayrer, right? Selecting. After winnowing, the next step in the bread making process is picking out and removing any pebbles or stones that are mixed among the kernels of grain. Okay, that's bayrer. Next, now we kind of, so we already had two of the separating things that you don't want, right? Or separating things, to put it that way. You had zoira, right, which was the winnowing. When you're trying to get what you don't, you're trying to, separate what you want, what you don't want. Then you have bayrer. But as been explained, it's different stages. Now we have hatoichin, grinding. This av includes grinding kernels of grain into flour and pounding spices into powder. That's the av malacha. The definition of the malacha is breaking down a large item into many, much smaller ones. Therefore, chopping vegetables into very small pieces are forbidden as a telada. So when you grind, you're typically grinding into a powder form. Taking something and making it to very small pieces is the tailada, is a derivative of that. Next, sifting. V'meraked, sifting. After the kernels of grain have been ground into flour, the flour is placed in a sieve and shaken. The fine flour falls through the holes in the sieve, leaving on top the relatively coarse granules of bran. Okay, so now they point out Although winnowing, selecting, and sifting all have one purpose, to remove the unwanted matter from a mixture. So why are we counting them as three different malachas? The Mishnah counts them as three separate avos because they are performed in three separate stages. First, one winnows the chaff from the kernels. Then one separates the pebbles from the kernels. Then one separates the pebbles from the kernels. And then after the kernels have been ground into flour, one sifts the flour to purify it. So the way the Gemara says it is that, why is it three? Because it's three different stages. And therefore we count them as three separate primary forms of malacha. Okay, next, vahalash. That means kneading. In the bread making process, water is poured onto flour and they are mixed to form a dough.
You did the same thing with the dyes?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
The Drena malacha entails forming a mixture of liquid and small solid pieces in which the liquid makes the solid pieces stick to each other. You're not making a dough out of them, but you are making them come together. Next, and the final one for...
No, what did we call that?
Lush is lush, kneading. Okay, v'ha'oifa, and baking. Okay, now, they don't point this out. Maybe they will. This av malacha, this av includes cooking or baking an item until it is edible, as with bread, or usable as with dyes. And if we're getting back into the actual case construction of the Mishkan, right?
Yeah.
Right. So it's the dyes that are the construction, right? When you don't bake dyes, you don't bake the plants, you cook them. But the Mishnah talks about baking. Why? Because it's Sidur de Pas. Because the order in which the way the Mishnah wants to express it is in the way you make bread. But at the end of the day, the baking and the cooking are really both av malacha. And the definition of that malacha is to basically cook or bake an item until it is edible as with bread or usable as with dyes. And you always think about bishul as food, but there's actually bishul in non-foods. The malacha is defined as using fire to soften a hard item or to harden a soft one. Again, for whatever purpose you're trying to use the heat to make it usable. Among its tailadas are melting wax or metal and heating clay to make earthenware. So all those are tailadas. But the point is that you have the Mishnah calls it oifa baking, but it's really baking and cooking, and it can be both in foods and in non-foods. Have a wonderful day.
Okay, thank you, Rabbi.
Okay.